to episode 261 of Late Night Linux. I'm Joe, and it's just me for the intro for our Christmas special episode. This is being released on Christmas Day 2023. And for this Christmas special, you're going to be hearing from various members of the Late Night Linux family. The idea for this episode was pretty simple. I posed a question to all the hosts of the Late Night Linux family shows and invited them to answer the question in about 2 minutes, recorded on their own. I thought that would be more practical than trying to get everyone together in the same place at the same time. And quite a lot of them sent me their recording. So the question was this: what would you do to make the internet better? The internet and the web started out with decent goals. Now, search is a disaster from SEO clowns, email is in the hands of a handful of corporations, and our way of life, democracy, is under threat from grifters capitalizing on ignorance. We need to come up with a plan for the sake of everyone. And I said, try to keep it light. I think that was the very difficult part of this. Now, part of this was that no one would listen to anyone else's until they were all recorded, and that includes me. I recorded mine before I listened back to any of these. So, let's start with Gary from Linux After Dark.
So I think for me, there's a few ways, and there's some trends that I'm already seeing that seem promising, and I think a lot of it is the continuation of those. Say, continued decentralization of things. I'm thinking about things like decentralized social media. Say, we've seen Mastodon come along and kind of disrupt, for certainly us in the tech community, what social media is. And I think that's been a really, really good thing. And that sort of probably stops the second thing for me, which is regulation to stop companies having a monopoly on certain industries. So I'm thinking Meta with social media and chat, or Google with search and email and just about everything else. And I think one of the things I'd really like to see is governments start to step in and regulate these things and have that trailblaze some of the regulation to stop AI from being such a problem and from causing widespread disruption. I think that would be something that I would like to see. Additionally, I think self-hosting is probably a really important way that we can help this. I'm thinking moving away from things like Google Photos or Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever it might be, moving to hosting our own things like a Nextcloud instance or Image for backing up photos, or just generally being a little bit more self-sufficient in the ways that we were before. I think one of the other things I'd like to see businesses do more is use open source technologies where they can to start to avoid some of the lock-in that maybe some of the big cloud companies might push them towards. And I think the final thing for me is startups actually being good, because I think a lot of these things are caused by unlimited startup money, lots of capital that was floating around, and ideas getting airtime that were just terrible, frankly, and really didn't have a business model around them. And I think that actually now that money isn't free, that's really going to help companies that spring up with web applications or things that people are actually going to use have a decent business model around them that isn't reliant on things like advertising or being bought by a billionaire or having more and more VC money just thrown at them every day.
Well, somewhat related to that is Phenom's answer.
No free shit. I think the biggest problem with the internet today is people expect things for free. And the problem is then that means that companies get to prey on people via ridiculous storage of search histories or tracking them all around the web. I think we need to find communities that we enjoy, a bit like Fosstodon, the way all of us are on that. There's a good group of people on there. I think Mastodon has been a great example of how that has happened, but invest in those communities would be the thing as well. Not everybody has the money to invest, maybe a small bit if they can, but it'd be a time as well. And I think that way we can build up sort of nodes of like-minded weirdos around the web that we all like. And that way there's less of an incentive for these companies because we don't really need them as such. We can just go about our business and they can do whatever the hell they want. And we get to have the internet the way we used to like it. That would also be don't get your email hosted, things like that. Maybe you don't get to run it yourself because you don't know, but loads of different servers run by friends or people that you're prepared to hire, and just take things back to the decentralized sort of way it used to be.
Let's hear from Allan from 2.5 Admins.
I think returning more to the decentralized nature of the internet would help. I understand the value of collecting more things in one place, and the discoverability that comes from a platform like YouTube rather than just a bunch of separate video sites, or each person having to have the infrastructure and pay for the bandwidth to host videos. But at the same time, when significant portions of the internet are at the whim of one company, it causes a problem. Federation helps with this to somewhat, although I think a lot of that still needs some work to make it something that can happen more and to somehow still keep control from being centralized. We've gone through many kind of iterations of the internet now, where we've gone from completely decentralized to more centralized to then a bit less and a bit more. And I don't know what the right mix is to be able to have the scale and have things not require each person that wants to post a video to have all their own infrastructure, but at the same time, make sure that control doesn't end up concentrated in just a few people.
And now Chris from Linux After Dark.
When you're someone my age who's grown up with the internet as almost a constant presence, pretty much, I think after I got rid of my Amiga 500, it's really sometimes hard to see the light at the moment when lots of the internet seems to be subsumed by capitalism, when you've known what it was. But I think the key is to continue to do the good version of disruption, which to me is things like our beloved and much hammered Firefox. When it first came along, it tipped the scales again, and it is fighting against the tide, I think. But it's about being mindful of the internet. I don't think at this stage we're going to get regulation to help us. However much you have antitrust lawsuits, however much you have supposed regulations, they don't fight back against what's happening. So it is in micro actions, I think, where things continue to be good. So when you look at things like Reddit, what's happened with that? Quite often now, if I search for things on Reddit, the search engines will have indexed a comment, but when you click on it, it says this post has been deleted. And I think the way forward is to try and embrace platforms that archive things effectively so that you know it's still there and you still have some kind of ownership. It's not easy, but I think that is the best way to get out of this, and hopefully the momentum carries us through. But it is difficult to be optimistic.
And now Will, who tried really hard to keep it light.
There are two things wrong with the internet: the tools that we have to use it and the people on it. Sadly, there isn't very much we can do about the people who use the internet. It used to be that someone with an ill-conceived opinion would stand in the park shouting at pigeons and be ignored, but now they have a global platform which they can use to attract other people with similar opinions and ideas. Governments and organisations have learned that people have short memories and are very easily manipulated, and this has undermined democracy, and people have been tricked into giving away their rights. I think something that would have a bigger impact on the quality of the web is for there to be more regulation around the tooling that users have to access the internet, and more specifically the web. That is not necessarily regulation of the internet itself or the content on it, but regulation of the browsers. When the web was about education, very little regulation or law was required. Then usage exploded, and we were found lagging behind with any kind of oversight of the browser market. This played out in antitrust with Internet Explorer and Chrome, but really nothing has changed at all. We need people in power not to see the internet and the web as some newfangled, confusing technology that boffins are in charge of, but as a public utility which should be managed in a way that other public utilities are, specifically operated with the interests of the public, not the corporations, at heart. We need regulation around privacy, tracking, accessibility, authentication, data protection, and it needs to be strong enough and new enough that billion-dollar corporations cannot ignore or circumvent this regulation. Yeah, we already have laws like this, but they are often outdated and full of holes when applied to the web. The web is a crazy free-for-all where the primary motivating factor is profit where it once was knowledge sharing. But the genie is out of the bottle, and advertising and money-making are here to stay as the driving factor of the web. The best thing we can do now is stop users being exploited by a lack of understanding of an industry which is moving so fast.
By declaring browsers a public utility, we can try and protect users' interests and bring back some sense of control. Also, no more novelty top-level domains, except .horse.
And now we come on to Kevin from Linux Dev Time.
I'm going to assume that this question is not just a Thanos-style snap your fingers and we could instantly eradicate all hate and violence from the internet, because if that was the case, then that would be my answer. So setting that answer aside, I think the one thing that I would really like to see happen is for users to be able to store and visualize the data that is collected about them by all these various sites and services. So what I think should happen is companies should be forced to allow users to download and export all of the data that has been collected about them, no matter how minuscule or irrelevant it may seem. Now, I understand that there's not a global government that can just make this happen for all companies out there on the internet, but in this hypothetical world, I'm going to assume that something like that is possible. So I would like to make it where companies have to be more transparent and allow you to download all of the data about yourself. Because I then think that once this data is downloaded, other companies or tools could then spin up that lets you visualize and correlate all this data between various companies and have a much more rich set of data that you could then use with some kind of, or as a monetary value to sites and services that you use. So instead of paying a monthly or annual membership, perhaps you could just give access to this data that you own about yourself. And it would also allow you to go in and redact out different parts of this data that you don't want any companies to see from a privacy respecting perspective. I think this would be a much better way for users to be in control of the data that they generate and allow them to fully utilize this data in a way that companies could also benefit from, but only from the consent of the user. And just to be clear, I don't think 1,000-page privacy policies or user agreements would meet this in any sort of meaningful way. I want a exportable format in a format that's well understood, JSON or YAML or something along those lines, so that users are in full control of the data that they generate, and then they can use it the way that they want. That's what I would do to make the internet a better place.
Now, that was quite a practical solution from Kevin, and it's interesting that Amolith, also from Linux Dev Time, and also a developer, had quite a practical solution.
All right, so think of a commercial NAS product. You go to their website, you find the one you're interested in, and you buy it. Later on, once it arrives, you plug it into the wall, maybe connect it to the internet, maybe not, then start setting it up from your web browser. And then maybe you poke through the community app store thing. It probably has, might not go by that name, but a lot of them have the same functionality. Now imagine that same product, but instead marketed towards regular people and available in stores like Walmart. They buy the box, do the setup stuff, and suddenly they have a home server with a user-friendly way to download and install open source applications they can use to replace some of the big tech stuff they rely on. Make it easy to connect a domain to that box, and suddenly you can replace a lot more. Imagine giving your mother her own email server, but it was as easy to install and set up as a Facebook account. Centralization does solve some problems like reducing complexity for the end user, but that model also causes a lot of problems. Facebook wouldn't have as easy a time building a profile on its users if those users were on federated servers that just decided not to federate with Facebook. Google deciding those pictures you took of your kid's medical condition were CSAM and deciding to lock your account wouldn't suddenly leave you without access to important documents in Google Drive, decades of pictures in Google Photos, and even your Gmail account. Because those documents are in that box in your living room, your pictures are in that box, and your email server's in that box, and hopefully that system has good encrypted backups out of the box. I don't think even decentralization is quite the answer, though, because you're still probably relying on someone else. If your server operator decides they're fed up with running Mastodon or whatever and just yeets the instance, you've irrevocably lost all of that data. The internet was designed initially to be distributed, and I think we should really strive to get back to that model.
I don't know how realistic that is of Amolith, but reach for the stars and all that. So on to mine. Now remember that I recorded this before I'd heard anyone else's. This is a really difficult question, because the temptation is to try and fix the web and the internet for everyone. But I don't think that is necessarily possible, and it's certainly not within my gift. So this might be a bit of a cop-out, but I think we can only fix the web and the internet for us. And by us, I mean people who care. People who don't care and just go on Facebook all the time and Instagram and use all these services that lock you in. I think we just have to leave them to it. And we have to just use open standards where we can. Make sure that we use open protocols like Mastodon and the Fediverse. And if we write a blog post, make sure that it's got a proper RSS feed that works. And if we do a podcast, for example, we make sure it's available on the open web and via a proper RSS feed, not locked up in Spotify or whatever. I think that video is something that is very difficult because the file sizes are so big. And there are things like PeerTube, and there's this massive network effect with YouTube. But I think it's important to be places like YouTube. There's no point just ignoring them. But maybe if you're going to do video, try and find a PeerTube instance as well that you can upload it to. And that might just be me and my ivory audio tower, where it's pretty easy to host your audio somewhere in your own RSS feed. But I think the way to get ourselves an internet and a web that we enjoy and want to be part of, we have to stick to open standards. And like I said, put stuff places like YouTube and Spotify as well for people who are happy to be locked into platforms. But otherwise, I think we just have to keep doing what we've been doing and just enjoy what we have. And now Graham's, which was quite similar to mine, I think.
I think I've said it before, but the internet, the communication revolution, technology, I think we're going through a huge epoch-defining change for the human race, learning to live with one another with instant communication. It is difficult now. I think it's going to get harder. And I don't think there's anything at the macro level that can be done. I think we need to resist regulation if we can. I think we need to resist government control if we can. I think we need to support open data, open standards. I think we need to support open initiatives and resist closed initiatives. And I think what it really comes down to is, just like in society, behaving in the way on the internet, online, that you want other people to behave with you. Be how you want the internet to be. I don't think it's going to happen quickly. I think it's going to take a long time. It might even take generations. But I do think that's the only way to make a real lasting change, is to be the example of what you want the internet to be. Put yourself at a disadvantage by not being on the latest social network. Be that pain in the arse who can't communicate over whatever it happens to be. Be the person that sticks to having their own email addresses or not being available on some chat channel. Be the person that misses out on the latest streaming whatever because of the tactics of the company behind it. As individuals, we're not going to have much effect, but it will also make us look for alternatives. And those alternatives, if they're strong enough, like Mastodon, will build up their own momentum and show that there's an alternative and a better way of doing things when something is open. Because I think we've proved it with Linux and open source that open does result in better technical solutions, more freedom, more choice, more opportunity to learn, and a much stronger foundation on which to build the future of the internet and society.
So there you have it. You've heard everyone's now. And some themes really jumped out at me. The first one was regulation, not of the content of the internet, but of the service providers, browsers, that sort of thing. It seems that most of us agree that we need to have some sort of legislation and regulation to make it actually work and not put all the power in a small number of corporations' hands. Also, self-hosting and decentralization. Almost everybody said some version of one of those two. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I'm sure everyone listening will have their opinions, so do send it in, show@latenightlinux.com. And before I get out of here, I need to say a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really, really do appreciate that. All of you people on Patreon are really making this whole thing possible. If you want to join those people and be part of making this all possible, then you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And as a thank you for supporting us, you can get ad-free feeds of the various shows for different prices. And also quite a lot of episodes are early these days, by about a day or so. So until next week then, when I'll be back with Phenom, Graham and Will, looking back at our 2023 predictions and looking forward with our 2024 predictions, I've been Joe, and we'll see you next week.